You're listening to Radio VR in Washington. I'm Rob Sachs. The nuclear disaster at the Fukushima power plant was one of the worst in the history of nuclear power. 3 years later, Japan is still trying to clean up. One story often overlooked from the event is the toll it took on those rushing to the aid of Japan, including Americans aboard the USS Reagan. The ship was dispatched to send aid to the area, but inadvertently traveled through a radioactive plume. Now, a group of 70-plus sailors who are experiencing medical issues is suing, saying the Tokyo Electric Power Company should have known better and should have been able to warn the ship not to go into the area. Here to tell us more about the case is Paul Garner. Welcome.
Thank you for having me on and for raising awareness to this very important issue.
So, as I said, a lot of people aren't even aware that this happened. Can you take us back to what the mission of the USS Reagan was and how they wound up in this radioactive storm?
The mission of the Reagan was a humanitarian one known as Operation Tomodachi. Tomodachi in Japanese means friends. And we had a pact with Japan dating back to the 50s whereby we would aid them in the event that they needed aid of this nature. Humanitarian aid was offered and accepted by Japan. The USS Ronald Reagan was on maneuvers off the coast of South Korea. When they learned of the earthquake and tsunami, they were told, the sailors were told that we're on our way to Japan. They didn't know exactly why, but on the way they became aware. So we sent the Reagan there with other vessels in order to provide water, food, blankets, necessities to the people of Fukushima, who had been devastated by the earthquake and tsunami that had occurred on 3/11/11.
And so at what point did the crew realize that they were traveling through this really horrible and dangerous storm?
Well, I'm not so sure that I would characterize it as a storm, so much as a release of radioactive steam from the power plant. And from what we understand, Rob, the people who were operating the power plant, Tokyo Electric Power Company, which is the defendant in the case, we're not suing the Department of Defense, we're not suing the Navy. We're going after the people who operated this man-made accident that was waiting to happen. The Reagan arrived there shortly, I guess, after the backwash of the tsunami was coming from the shore, but it didn't. The Reagan didn't arrive until March 12th, around 1:30 in the afternoon. So it wasn't known to the command, and it wasn't known to the sailors aboard the Reagan that they were actually heading into a zone, an exclusion zone, where they had, by that time, a meltdown of reactor number 1. Now, when that happened, and that was a result of a loss of coolant, which was recognized by the people who were operating the power plant. And according to former Prime Minister Naoto Kan of Japan, who was in charge of the country at that time, the core meltdown occurred within 5 hours of the earthquake. Now, the earthquake occurred at 2:46 p.m. local time, and then the tsunami came in about 40 to 45 minutes afterward. But witnesses have reported that the pipes on the reactor were cracking, and that there was radioactive steam being released right into the reactor building and beyond. Consequently, they knew at that point that they were on their way to a core meltdown. And what they failed to do was notify their own government in Tokyo that things were spiraling out of control at that point, and they actually had a core meltdown. In fact, by around 9 p.m. that evening, the TEPCO people sent a fax through to the government office in Tokyo, and they said the backup cooling systems are engaged and they're operational, and they seem to be effective. And none of the above was true. They didn't have them turned on. They didn't know it was not turned on, and the core was just melting out of control. So we're these first responders who were aboard the Reagan and other vessels, including the Essex, the Germantown, the Preble, the Washington, were invited, if you will, to go into a zone when the people who created the problem there couldn't deal with it. And they didn't bother notifying the command in the world what these sailors were going to be encountering. So they sailed in, and some of the pictures we've seen show that they got pretty close to the Fukushima nuclear power plant, and there was a release of radioactive isotopes, which were detected on some helicopters that were coming back to the Reagan after delivering humanitarian supplies to Fukushima Prefecture, not to the power plant. Okay, they were not there to assist the government of Japan or the Tokyo Electric Power Company in fighting radiation. So the helicopters came back. The sensor devices went off on them. The sensor devices went off on the Reagan. They attempted to decontaminate the helicopters, but all they had to utilize at that time was seawater, and the seawater was highly radioactive, full of debris. And you've seen, I'm sure, pictures of the Reagan sailors swabbing down the deck with soap and water without proper, they're not wearing, spacesuits. Okay, they're not like the TEPCO people who are wearing the white suits with the self-contained breathing devices, and they're out there in the elements, breathing it in, soaking it in. According to Lindsay Cooper, who was on the deck, it started to snow, and then she tasted this metallic taste in her mouth, and so did the others, and they were having snowball fights and joking around about it until they were warned that it was radioactive and they should not be doing that. It's a situation that could have and should have been avoided. It was a consequence of negligence and beyond, and that's why we're suing Tokyo Electric Power Company for their negligence, which they, in retrospect themselves, in doing a post-mortem, have pretty much done a mea culpa and realized that it was an accident waiting to happen. They didn't have a plan to deal with it. And then by the time the Reagan was operating there from March 12th, probably for 3 weeks beyond, just sailing around and getting doused with radioactive particles. And then the people on the ship were warned not to drink the water. The water is provided to the ship through a desalinization process, and they were pumping in seawater into the tanks, and the seawater that they desalinated and pumped in was radioactive. The air system was also contaminated, and there were efforts made to try to decontaminate it shortly thereafter. And the Reagan just sailed around because there was no friendly port that would let them in because they were considered to be too highly radioactive. Now, Rob, what you saw in the news and what many saw in the news was the Reagan sailing through this described as a nuclear plume.
That's right.
So if you remember that made news back shortly in March of 2011. It hit over in Australia. It was it was covered by ABC, but it never really got any traction in this country. The Reagan sailed around for weeks before they could find a friendly port to land in. By that time, the people on board were pretty well toast, and the Reagan itself became contaminated. After that, the Reagan spent a year and a half up in Bremerton, Washington, for what they considered to be routine maintenance, but it was anything but routine. I mean, they decontaminate the vessel as best they could, and they shipped the contaminated debris over to Hanford. There's a site in Washington State, east of Seattle and east of Bremerton, where they just dispose of the radioactive material. But the people who were in charge of decontamination of the Reagan realized that they couldn't get all of the radiation out of it, and they were just told to paint it, give it a painting. So they painted it. I don't know if they used lead-based paint, but that would be worthwhile to find out. But
well, let's get back to this case against the Tokyo Electric Power Company. So far, 70 sailors have medical issues, but there are more, and this could be a pretty huge payout, I guess. What would you like to see happen?
Rob, what I'd like to see happen is the people responsible provide the funding that's necessary in order to start treating these victims. We're asking for unspecified damages for each one, but given the fact that there were 70,000 participants, U.S. Citizens, who were part of Operation Tomodachi, maybe 30,000 of them were active military. That's a huge number. Now, the Department of Defense started the Operation Tomodachi registry shortly after the disaster in order to track people prospectively. Unfortunately, they've taken the position that it was all low dose, it didn't cause any harm, and they dropped the registry. So what I would like to see happen is for the Tokyo Electric Power Company people to provide $3 billion in funds to put into a Fukushima radiation victims account, if you will, non-taxable, that could just grow and provide relief to these people into the future so they could get medical care. Because they can't get it from the VA. It's a matter of you have to establish that your injury was due to radiation. We're very satisfied that these people who have significant injuries, that the cause was their exposure to radiation. And I'll tell you why. Most of them were in their 20s. They didn't have any prior family histories of leukemias and bleeding, incessant bleeding from their anus or from their vagina. They didn't have problems with their vision, like Louis Viernes, who is on the Washington now, is blind in one eye. He wanted to be a pilot, and he participated in this. It's unlike... for those of us who have studied radiation and Chernobyl and beyond, it just seems that there's just too many people in the same place at the same time without any family background or any reason to believe that they had these issues to now show up with these significant cancers and beyond. So we feel that time will tell. In many instances, there's a latency period. Everybody, the host is very different, but we do know from those who were drinking contaminated water, exposed to the plume, exposed to breathing the air, and in coming in contact with radioactive materials, that somebody has to explain why these things have occurred with all of them, especially considering that they all had physicals and they were all in top health in order to handle equipment that cost, like the Reagan cost $4.3 billion to construct, and all the helicopters and all the jets and everything. And it's quite an undertaking. 5,500 aboard the Reagan alone. So what we're seeing is, I hope I'm answering your question, but what we're trying to do is get these people who are responsible to do what was done for the victims of Agent Orange in Vietnam. A fund was set up by Dow Chemical Company and others to treat them, to help them, to compensate them, because and then the same thing was done in Desert Storm. President Obama signed a $1 billion bill last year to provide that relief to those who were exposed to radiation in Operation Desert Storm. So we are asking those who were responsible for causing the problem in the first place to provide the funding, because our government, obviously, if they can't fund the VA to help these people prospectively, like Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont and the chief doctor at the VA had advocated early on to have an Operation Tomodachi registry and track all 70,000 participants prospectively. That's what our mission is here, is to provide them help. And Rob, beyond that, they're all young people. They're in their 20s and everything, and their lifespans have been impacted. They're going to have shortened lifespans. They're not going to be around to provide for their loved ones and their family as they otherwise would be able to. So we're inviting the TEPCO people to join us in the spirit of Tomodachi. And as friends, if your friend fuko's up, you expect your friend to make it right, and then you go on. So we want them to afford the ability to these young people to somehow get their lives back.
That's Paul C. Garner. He's a lawyer representing 70-plus sailors who were exposed to radiation, and they are suing the Tokyo Electric Power Company. Thank you so much.
Take care, Rob.